Good morning, distinguished guests, ambassadors, Ambassador Ernal. Thank you for joining us here at the Atlantic Council's headquarters and from around the world. We have gathered here today to discuss Syria's integration to global economy and the role Turkish and U.S. cooperation can play to achieve this aim. Where the topic of Syria once an area of friction between the United States and Turkey, two NATO allies, we have seen an evolving cooperation on areas ranging from the private sector to security and beyond, to tap the region's potential. The fate, security, and prosperity of Syria is tied to that of the region, just as regional politics will influence Syria's future. The war in Iran that began last weekend has changed the trajectory of the country, region, and of course this conversation significantly. Together with you, I am looking forward to hearing today how these recent developments will impact Syria as well as the whole region and the role that Turkey can play. We are joined by a panel of esteemed experts with extensive experience ranging from security to energy, from Turkey to the Gulf and to Syria itself. I greatly look forward to hearing their insights. With that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Atlantic Council Turkey Program Non-Resident Senior Fellow, Rich Altson, to kick off the panel discussion and to introduce our panelists. Rich, floor is yours.
Thank you, Daphne. Great to see some familiar faces out here. Welcome, everybody, to the Atlantic Council. We live in momentous times, both with regards to the topic of today's panel, Syria, and other things in the region as well as the globe. So it's a pleasure to be here to discuss these things with you, in front of you, with such a distinguished panel. With me today is a panel that includes, in order to my left and your right, Ambassador Ömer Önhon, as a board member of the Ankara Policy Center and a former ambassador of the Republic of Turkey to Syria. Jonathan Bass, Chairman and CEO of Argent LNG. Victoria Taylor, who's the director of the Iraq Initiative at the Rafiq Hariri Center and Middle East Programs here at the Atlantic Council. And Anas Al-Qaed, director of programs at the Gulf International Forum. Each of them deeply expert in Syria, but also in the region. And as we had a chance to have some discussions before we came out, some very interesting thoughts and observations await you. So I think the way that we'll start this is with just a reminder of some ground rules. This session is on the record, so be careful. We encourage everyone here to engage with us on social media using the Twitter handles @AC_TR program and the hashtag #ACTurkey. Also on LinkedIn with our program page, the Atlantic Council Turkey Program. There'll be some questions that we'll open with here to prompt some responses and some kind of prepared thoughts from the team. And then as we get a little bit deeper into the program, I'll turn to you in the audience, and we really would like this to be participative. So we have some questions that will come in online, but I will give preference to anybody in the room that has a question as well. So with that, let's begin. Ambassador Önhon, if I can start with you. Can you talk about Turkey's strategy over the course of the war in Syria, 15 years or more? President Trump has repeatedly called Assad's overthrow a takeover by Turkey. He meant that as a compliment. How would you describe that strategy, and how do you evaluate Turkey's position in Syria now?
Well, thank you. The war, when it started in 2011, just beyond our borders, came as a shock, actually. It had so many effects on Turkey, very heavy effects, and just to go back a little bit and remind ourselves of how Turkey really suffered, we can talk about the deficiencies in the security field from PKK, from ISIS, and from Assad regime itself. And then we had to deal with Russia and Iran on a number of occasions, and in some cases in direct confrontation, plus all the economic difficulties and so on. So, and also, last but not least, of course, 3.5 million Syrian refugees who poured into Turkey, and we still have about 2 million of them today. So all these combined, really, Turkey suffered some very heavy consequences and was, one way or another, involved in the crisis in two ways. I mean, first of all, Turkey was very much with the opposition And of course, the Syrian crisis, the Syrian issue became a part of Turkish internal politics. I mean, at one point, and it still is to an extent, it's not really possible to think Syria without Turkish domestic politics. So now that Assad is gone, of course, there is a new period in front of us, but that doesn't mean that the Syria crisis has come to an end. I say that this is only a new phase in the crisis. Now there is another crisis and there is another phase, a very complicated phase, because every solution that you come up with breeds or creates new problems, like the YPG issue, for example. So we are not really, I mean, we are hopeful that there will be stability and security in Syria beyond our borders, but then, unfortunately, I still think that there is a lot of things to do in Syria in the future. One problem, I think, which makes any solution very difficult in Syria is the agendas and priorities of outside actors, third countries, for example, Turkey, Israel, the United States, Saudi Arabia, other Arab countries. All these third parties have to be satisfied one way or another. If you pull these third countries out of the equation, it could probably be easier to solve the problem, but the realities of life prevail. Now, with the most recent crisis, of course, in Iran, the US-Israel attack on Iran, I think there is a new dynamic in the region, a new equation in the region. Now, it does not seem to have affected Syria very much, but if the conflict prolongs, I think Syria will also be affected in one way or another. Now, on a last note, we all know the background of President Shara, of course, but then I have to say, looking at his performance for the last year, I think he is doing a good job. I mean, we should not really forget that the country has been under the Ba'ath regime for 50, 60 years, and then it has suffered a civil war which lasted for 14 years. So we cannot really expect Syria to recover and become a Switzerland overnight. It will take time. There will be many problems, but Ahmed al-Shara seems to be quite pragmatic in the way that he has taken. He is not looking for confrontation with Israel, for example, even though Israel keeps pushing their nerves and disrespecting the sovereignty of Syria. But still, Shara is doing a good job. The economy is not, of course, at the point which we should hope for, but this will also take time. With all the security problems and political problems, we cannot really expect the investors coming running to Syria, but this will happen. I mean, if it goes in that path, I'm hopeful for the future of Syria, inshallah.
Quick follow-on. How surprised were you and was Ankara that Ahmed al-Shara was able to do what he did in December of 2024?
I don't know how surprised Ankara was, but I think I was quite surprised with the speed and pace of the advance of al-Shara. I mean, to be very frank, I would hardly think that al-Shara would find it so easy to take over the country, despite the many difficulties, and become the president. I mean, the advance of HTS was really incredible, but I always think and say that this would not have been possible without quite intensive backdoor diplomacy and some talks, I think, yeah.
Thank you. So, Jonathan, I'd like to turn to you. Syria's energy resources represent a major opportunity for commercial interests, strategic interests, and funding the reconstruction of Syria. What are the political steps that Syria, the United States, and others can take to capitalize on that potential? And how much investment is needed?
So I think first, my philosophy has been that Syria needs to control Syrians' assets and their natural resources. For Syria to build a foundational company, I looked when I was with the president and we discussed the Aramco model, and it's putting all of the assets under one company and putting that company, which he formed, which became SPC, putting that out on the market and moving investment in through that vehicle so that you can assure that the assets were actually going to reconstruction and to the people, and where was the money flow going to ultimately go. The steps to getting there are moving forward. I mean, Tom Barak came in. First, I have to thank President Trump, because nothing would have happened if we didn't have the initial engagement and the willingness for President Trump and MBS to open the door in Saudi Arabia. Nothing that you see today would actually be there, and we would look at a conflict with Iran in a much different way today without having al-Shara at our table rather than at their table. And that's the vision that President Trump brought to the table in bringing al-Shara in. So I think al-Shara's vision in controlling the energy resources and taking it away from individual players is first uniting the East with the West, because the West didn't have maybe 30% of the volume of the natural resources of the country. So Mazloun had to come to the table, and peace had to be made in some format between the East and the West to be able to really monetize the natural resources. The investment that needs to happen is quite significant. Pipelines are completely destroyed internally. I mean, power stations are gone. The spare parts that are needed to fix and rehabilitate the power generation systems that are there are long lead times. Some of them are as long as 48 months right now. So we have to look at how long is it going to take and what's the investment that's going to come in to make it happen. UCC has stepped forward with the Qataris in making their first deal and getting a sovereign guarantee to come in and fund power generation. And Turkey with Kalyon has come in, and I think Cengiz came in to help on solar development. And Kalyon has a phenomenal factory in Ankara that produces their own cells so they can quickly mobilize solar production. But Syria had, Damascus, when I was in there, had 2 gigawatts of power, solar power already installed, one of the largest single units of power generation coming from solar. So Syria is in need of serious investment, and I think it's in the hundreds of billions of dollars that need to be invested in. The amount of crude that we feel could be elevated to is about 800,000 barrels a day. Plus there's a phenomenal amount of gas that could be used. So our plan was to first stabilize Syria itself and its energy generation, because you can't build an economy without the foundational brick being energy. So you can't have a hotel, you can't have resorts, you can't have a factory, you can't have jobs without the baseload energy that is required for that. So first, stabilize local energy demand. Second, stabilize regional energy demand, Lebanon, surrounding countries that need energy. And then third, export. So I think al-Shara is looking at that in the way that the Minister of Energy and Youssef at SPC are trying to plan the future. I believe we need American companies in there, because I think stability will come where Iraq failed, and the failures that we see on the Iraqi side, we don't want to duplicate on the Syrian side. I think it's very important to bring security, stability, and the environment for American energy companies to come into Syria. Those companies need to be bolted on to partners like the Turks, like Saudi, like Kuwait, other players that help stabilize the region. The problem is that you're playing whack-a-mole. So as the Syrians make a decision with one government, someone else is pissed. And they hit that one, another one's pissed. So trying to make everyone happy, as the ambassador said, is probably the most difficult issue they have to contend with. And I think what we need to do is stop trying to make people happy and try to get the Syrian people stabilized, jobs, and a future.
Excellent. I really take your point to heart about not repeating the mistakes of Iraq. And another part of that is that internal division between the Kurdistan region in Iraq and the central government, which impeded energy policy and full production for years.
So in my conversations, I believe that you need a one Syria flag. You know, everybody's got to come under one flag. We have 50 states, but we have one flag. And so, you know, that's a very important dynamic that the Kurds need to understand. They're not Kurdish, they're Syrian first, you know. And building a country has to come from the bottom up, and it has to be built for the people. Trust and in their flag has to be number one.
Glad you mentioned the Kurds. I'm going to turn to Victoria next with a question that touches on their role. By all accounts, the United States played an important role in crafting an agreement between Damascus and the Syrian Democratic Forces, Kurdish-led, to bring an end to the violence in January. And now the U.S. looks poised to withdraw its forces, has withdrawn a significant amount already. How much influence will the U.S. have after all of its forces are gone? And what tools does the administration have at its disposal to foster that dialogue?
Yeah, well, thanks, Rich. I mean, I think one of the key points here is obviously that resolving some of the issues related to the role of the Syrian Kurds within the Syrian state has removed a major bilateral irritant in the U.S.-Turkey relationship. And so I think that's one of the critical pieces here that brings greater alignment between the United States and Turkey in the policy towards Syria. And I think it's something that we could see coming. When you have the U.S. ambassador to Turkey also serving as the Syria envoy, I think it really brings together those policies in a way that really contributes to that kind of alignment. This was a very difficult moment, I think, for the Syrian Democratic Forces and for the Syrian Kurds. Despite statements from the United States over many years that this was a temporary and somewhat transactional relationship, I think the outbreak of violence and, the difficulty in reaching an agreement really shows that there were still some hopes from the Syrian Kurds that there'd be greater United States support for stronger autonomy. That's not what has ultimately happened, and I think and hope that the agreement that was reached will be durable over the long term. I think in terms of the U.S. military presence, reaching an agreement between Damascus and the Syrian Kurds was really critical to allow the departure of more U.S. troops. And I think we knew from the first Trump administration this has long been one of President Trump's goals, to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. And it's part of the broader vision that was in the national security strategy to really reduce the U.S. military presence throughout the Middle East. That also paves the way for the potential withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraqi Kurdistan in September 2026. This was negotiated. The U.S. is still going to play in a very important role, and of course, one of the tools that the U.S. still has is the tool of sanctions. The U.S., of course, has removed the Caesar sanctions, but there's still the state sponsor of terrorism designation. And I think we're going to continue to see, strong engagement by Congress and others in Washington to really see that the Shah government is headed in a path that supports U.S. interests in the future.
If I can do the same thing I did with Ambassador Unhon, I'd like to ask a quick follow-up on that. How surprised were you at the speed of developments over the last 2 to 3 months and sort of the changed power balance between Damascus and the Northeast?
I think this was a train that everyone could see coming down the tracks for many years, but I don't think any of us knew exactly when this was going to happen. And I think from statements we'd seen, from President Trump, from Tom Barrack, I think there was, a growing understanding that the moment would come when the U.S. was going to kind of remove this protective shield around the SDF and was going to be pushing for a negotiated solution about, really the balance of power and how the Syrian Kurds were going to be integrated into a Syrian state. And of course, we had statements from Ambassador Barrack talking about, the failure of federalism, the importance of a centralized state. So it was something that was going to happen at one point. I didn't know exactly when this was going to happen, but unfortunately, it did lead to violence. Hopefully this agreement can hold and that there's greater realism on both sides about how the two parties can work together within the broader Syrian state.
Thank you. Anas, Damascus under President Shara is facing a monumental task of rebuilding the country both politically and physically. How do you grade, we're a little bit over a year in now, how do you grade the first year plus of the Shara transitional government, and what do you see as the top priority for him and for the government over the next year?
Thank you, Rich, and it's a pleasure to be here with distinguished panelists. The assessment, I can't give one assessment overall. I can, if I may, look at it sector by sector or look at the performance based on the different ministries and priorities of the country. And in order to look at the performance of Shara, we have to bring the heritage in the context of the overall picture of the country. The heritage he received from Assad. 15 years of a brutal conflict, 60 years of dictatorship. That left the country without any institutions, without a national identity even. Syrians were divided on different lines, starting with sectarian, ethnic, and ending with a city identity between the people of Aleppo and Homs and the south and Damascus. So there was not really a sense of Syrianism, a national identity that would bring people together to make the job easy for President Shara. That is one item in the menu, but the other item is his background. A jihadi, to put it simply, who worked really hard to reform for the last few years, not only since he came to power. And obviously, as Ambassador has mentioned, very pragmatic person. And I think also Shara was lucky to have so many lessons from Syria and from the region to be pragmatic. He saw that I think Assad didn't even hear the word pragmatism before. He was the most stubborn, unpragmatic person. And it was always for us as people who follow Syria to assess what Assad could or would do is to look at what is the most stubborn, stupid thing someone could leader do in an unrest, and he would follow. The transition right now, whether reconstruction, whether framing the transitional period, is the biggest challenge for Shara. If I look at the sectors, and this, by the way, this goes deep in the different sectors, whether security, because security is in every detail. Security is in bringing Syrians together, making Syrians talk to each other, allowing some sort of a national dialogue. Even with the investments, with unifying the country, with whether Sweda, whether Eastern area, security is a core. In my opinion, a major achievement for President Shara was controlling tens of thousands of Islamist militias in one army. Right now, it's called the National Army, but I think they need to work really hard on making it national by allowing other segments, other ethnic groups, other religious minorities and groups to join this army, to encourage them, not only allow them, to encourage them to work with some sort of a narrative that welcomes everyone into the security sector, whether police, domestic, they call it the general security, or the national army. That is very important, and that is important as well to encourage investors that there is a sense of stability in Syria. And Syrians have agency in the transition period and in the future of the state. Saying that also reminds me of an important factor, the bureaucracy of the Syrian state. Assad has dismantled Syria's institutions. And here I'm talking on all levels, not only security, I'm talking about Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Social Affairs. In many of the discussions with the ministers and officials in the transitional government, some of the ministries didn't know what properties they own. There was no record. And some of the ministers also mentioned that we don't know what budget we have. We don't know what is the expenditures that has been going for, how the records, how the books are organized in their ministry. Governance remains their, governance style remains their real challenge. And I think, I think all Syrians, not only the government of Shara, the 22 million Syrians, no one has experience in governance. We were under dictatorship. So we know the don't do, we don't know how to do. We know that don't follow a Taif agreement, don't do the de-Ba'athification of Iraq, don't do the sectarian-based policies. However, the government has did so many of these mistakes. In the appointments, nepotism is high within the government. We see brothers and sons and wives and daughters of the officials taking positions. The freedom within the country has pushed back. Freedom of speech, the backlash, the people's, going out and calling the government on the mistakes that they have been going, whether in decision-making or implementation, has pushed the government to do better job.
A quick follow-up on the psychology of Syria since we've compared to Iraq previously. 1 year after the deposition of Saddam, the wheels had come off in Iraq, and people were starting to understand what a mess the country was. A little bit over a year after the fall of Assad, how's the psychology of the Syrian people?
I think Syrians are over with the jubilation and celebration of getting rid of Assad, and they are hit with the reality. So you see more of angry social media posts, people confronting the officials in different capacity, whether they are meeting them over Ramadan iftar or in official, in meetings. That is healthy, that is super necessary, because we're not dealing with a normal government. The government is divided between technocrats who know what they're doing, but they are not empowered because they are not part of HTS or former HTS. And then you have a big part of the government, to be fair, not the majority, but they hold the sovereign ministries, who are extremely empowered, and Syrians started to realize that there is a need to move from factionalism, appointing people who think like me, who look like me in some of the cases as well, and into more capable, professional officials or people who can make proper decisions and follow through.
Healthy trend. If criticizing your government is a sign of public health, then we're doing pretty well here in Washington.
Oh, yeah.
So, Ambassador, coming back to you, speaking of Washington, how aligned are Ankara and Washington on Syria now? And do you see the risk to alignment with the upcoming U.S. elections? We seem to be under the Barak paradigm with him both as ambassador and regional envoy. Pretty aligned, but how do you see that playing out over the next year?
Well, we had serious problems with the U.S. I mean, just to go back a little bit, when the crisis started, I remember in Damascus how enthusiastic the U.S. was to get rid of Assad, and then they became extremely reluctant, which I think is one of the major reasons which extended the duration of the war. Now, during the course of the crisis, I think the biggest disagreement between Turkey and the US was centered on the YPG issue. The US took YPG and later, with a very creative formula which turned into SDF, the US picked that organization as its local partner in combating terrorism, in combating ISIS. But at the same time, knowing very well that the YPG was in fact the extension of PKK in Syria, that caused really some very big misgivings in Ankara. And I think that has really marked the relations between Turkey and the US since then. Now, with the Trump administration and with Ambassador Tom Barak taking over as his special representative, things seem to be shifted to another direction with the US and Turkey on the same page, which I don't really agree for the following reason. I mean, now the US and Turkey are talking to each other more and more. They are more sensitive about each other's problems, that's for sure, and they are really seeking ways for cooperation to the extent possible. But then, if you look at what's happening on the ground, I think Turkey is not really in the position to be able to say that, okay, we have achieved all we want. I mean, if you look at Syria today, yes, the SDF is no longer controlling like 30-35% of territory in Syria, and they are, squeezed into a very small area in the country. But then they have their own area, the Kurdish areas, the so-called Kurdish areas, in the agreements. They have their own brigades intact and deployed in the places that they want them to be deployed, and they have quite a number of advantages. So I rather look at the issue in terms of legalizing an illegal structure. I mean, isn't it the YPG, the PKK is an illegal structure, but now it has been legalized in a way within the context of becoming a unit within the legal Syrian army. So the problem has not come to an end, and we have to see how all these agreements will be embedded into the new Syrian constitution. I mean, this is when the real problem will surface once again. Now, in addition to that, we have the Iranian factor now. We have been reading for the last couple of days that certain US agencies are now in contact with the PJAK, which is the sister organization of PKK in Iran, again as land forces, local partner in that country. So that really makes us think, well, are we seeing a repetition rather of what we witnessed in Syria for the last 10 years? And that would, if that is the case, that would really be a new episode in, not so positive relations between the US and Turkey. So that is one issue that we should be very watchful. I think it would be a grave mistake to repeat the mistakes that were done on both sides, probably, in Syria. I mean, we don't want to live through another episode of disagreements, pushing aside the real issue. Was that the question? I forgot the rest of it, but I
Well,
hope
the last part on Iran was part of the question, but you've
Okay,
answered the
good.
question quite fulsomely. Thank you, sir.
I'm happy, thank you.
Jonathan, how important, since we're talking about U.S. policy, how important has U.S. policy been in positioning U.S. energy companies to play a role in Syria's energy sector? And how do you evaluate Syria's approach to attracting foreign private sector investment?
So first, I would agree on the technocrat side and the ministers. So in evaluating al-Shara's government after a year, it's really his selection of people that he surrounds himself with. I think the Minister of Finance, Yassir, is phenomenal in the direction that he's going to put a base together and foundational structure in the banking system and back into a world banking system. And for any energy company to come in, we need a functional banking system on the ground. So that's first and foremost. And I would say that, going back to just one thing that you had said, on keeping the Kurds in the east in line, it's really important that the Iraqi Kurds stay engaged with Mazloun to make sure that that stays stable, because the lever is the Iraqi Kurds that have sort of brought this calm. So I think once we get security calm, once we get east and west calm, al-Shara, I think, is keeping his restraint to actions of neighbors and trying to keep things calm. If it stays, it's then the deployment of capital within the region, and how do we show that Syria is a better option to invest in than Libya, than other areas in the world that have energy and need and are required to have the same deployment of capital. So deployment of capital is very important for an energy company to move in, and how are we going to move those molecules and monetize that? So I think it's the whole supply chain within the energy sector that will happen. But I think stability, they're very grateful on one hand. I think Syria is very lucky to have the Turks right next to them, because the Turkish economy has a tremendous amount of infrastructure that has helped Syria stabilize. And I think that is, and ultimately will be, how the energy companies come in. We are working diligently with the SPC right now to put the first U.S. consortium together. And I think we see line of sight to getting it done, not going through Qatar and UCC, but going directly into Syria. So I think we need more direct investment in Syria to make that move forward and show that it's proof. Proof is in the pudding. So if we can execute, show stability, show security, I think the rest will come.
If Tom Barrack and Jonathan Bass are sort of point men for getting us in there, do the point men have enough backing in Washington, both the Congress and the bureaucracy?
Look, I would say that first, President Trump's pick of Tom Barrack as the Syrian envoy is the success that's going on right now within the stability, because Tom was able to see and navigate through his experience over the last 30, 40 years within the region, and how he brings in the partners to stabilize. And I think it was, the will of God that he ended up being the ambassador of Turkey, because that was a very important piece of the puzzle for the future stability of Syria. When I went to Syria, when you say darkness, it wasn't dark. These people were living in total blackout. And you're taking a people from blackout and putting the lights on. They don't know, they don't even have a job. They didn't have computers. I'd go into offices, there'd be a screen, a keyboard, and I'd look and there would be no computer. So everything was in paper. He's right, they didn't know who owned what. People don't know what owns what. Papers were destroyed, burnt, so files. So I think Tom Barrack, given the hand that he was dealt, and having the president behind him, has led to the success. And every time I talk to Tom and we say, well, he says, Tom, you did a good job. He says, we're doing it for the president. The president is really engaged in Syria, and he's very much in the weeds, understanding the details of what's going on. So you have a very strong ambassador who's not looking for a future lobbying job, and that makes him focused on his legacy and the success of his path. And I think I'm grateful that Tom is in the seat he's in, and I think it's the success that we've seen.
Excellent, thank you. Victoria, can you talk a little bit about how Iraq fits into the questions of Syria's stability and vice versa? They are awfully close and interrelated. How concerned should officials in DC and the region be about the reemergence of ISIS, given the permeability between Iraq and Syria?
Yeah, I mean, I think ISIS is the greatest example of how cross-border challenges and cross-border security issues really impact both countries. And, what happens in Iraq doesn't necessarily stay in Iraq and vice versa. I think we should remain very watchful about ISIS. Certainly, we continue to see ISIS attacks in Syria. We periodically see ISIS attacks in Iraq as well. As the United States continues to withdraw from Syria and, it looks likely to end the Operation Inherent Resolve counter-ISIS mission, I think there's going to need to be some very serious coordination and consultation, not only with Damascus, with Baghdad, with Erbil, with other international coalition partners about how we're going to continue to ensure that the fight against ISIS continues. I think there's still some questions about the capacity of the Syrian forces to continue that fight. And that's probably why we saw, the U.S. support the transfer of 7,000 detainees from Syria to Iraq. That included over 2,000 Syrians. That's not exactly a huge vote of confidence that, the situation was so stable that they could remain there. So I think certainly, ISIS is a threat. We know that there was a lot of Captagon being produced and trafficked. That's another serious threat, that can remain a challenge between Syria and Iraq. But, I think more broadly, Damascus, Baghdad, Erbil, those relations are not very strong. I visited Baghdad shortly after the fall of Assad in January 2025. The Iraqis have been among the most reluctant to really build a relationship with the Shara government. And they were very quick to point out to me, you guys, the Americans, you were holding him in jail because he was an ISIS fighter. And I think those memories still remain very strong, both in Baghdad and Erbil. And it's been a little bit difficult for them to overcome. As far as the Kurdish issues, which Jonathan mentioned as well, clearly these are very interlinked between, the Kurdistan Democratic Party, the PUK, the Syrian Kurds. There's some common interests there in maintaining stability and some concerns about that outbreak of violence. Certainly the Iraqi Kurds can play a very helpful role in trying to ensure that this stability holds. But going back to this latest news about the possibility of the United States arming Iranian Kurds, these Kurdish issues are all very interlinked. And I'm seeing, a lot of concern from Iraqi Kurds about this possible move by the United States as well. They don't want to be further drawn into a conflict with Iran, even though at this point, Iraq really remains at the front lines of this conflict. They are being struck right now by the United States, by Iran, and then also by the Iraqi militias. So I think, the developments in Iraq, related to this conflict with Iran certainly could spill over into Syria as well.
Thank you. Anas, I've got a two-part question for you. Uniting the country after more than a decade of civil war was never going to be pretty or easy, and there's still a lot of questions and fears in some communities, Druze, Alawites, Christians, maybe some others, over the government's approach to minorities. How can that be successfully navigated is the first question. And the second is there a clear path for major reconstruction without more clear picture on this internal reconciliation?
The answer to both is security. The government needs to control whatever rogue factions within the security sector, within the national army, or within the general security. This is one. Second, until now, that is my observation of my talk to Syrians when I was in Damascus, or actually Damascus and other cities in Syria. There is no better way of saying that Syrians haven't met each other yet. The country was divided. People in Damascus were furious by practices of people in other areas in Damascus. People in Homs, the city is divided between Alawites and Sunnis. And I personally went and tried to work on coexistence, how do you call it, Silm al-Ahli, coexistence dialogue within different community in conflict, whether in Latakia or in Homs or in countryside of Damascus. There is this general feeling of injustice, grievance that needs to be processed, not only by the Sunnis who lost hundreds of thousands, the Arab Sunnis who lost hundreds of thousands during the 15 years of the revolution, but also by the minorities who feel threatened, by the Kurds, who their rights was taken, was stripped by the Ba'ath regime, and there was a very systematic state-led persecution against the Kurds. They were empowered during the fight against ISIS. All of a sudden, they lost this importance. So they have a fear of going back to the old status quo. The government should and must lead a national dialogue. When the first Syrian state in 1920, the first national conference during King Faisal, I'm going back 100 years ago, during King Faisal rule, in I think 1925, that lasted for over a year. Syrian delegations were coming from all over the country. And that was even before there was a Syrian republic. So people were coming from Lebanon, from Palestine, from Jordan, to discuss what is the shape and form and the social contract that we are required to build. And one of the main factors that pushes Syrians toward this fear, and not only minorities, is there is no clear shape or agreement on the identity of this government. Everyone right now has a huge fear of the word secularism because of what the Ba'ath, who claimed to be secular, but oppressed any different opinion, including seculars, not only Islamists, not only people who were liberals with different opinions and stakes on different issues of the country. But that is the main responsibility. Civil society needs and must be empowered as well. There is enough knowledge, I think, in Syria and will among Syrians to help build bridges. And again, back to the security, if we do not give sense of assurances to every Syrian, and here I'm not alienating, I'm not only talking about the Kurds and the religious minorities, I'm talking also there is a huge part of, the Arab Sunnis of the cities who are furious. One of his main failures is the economic policies. And through his failed economic policies, he managed to piss off the Arab Sunnis of particular segments in Damascus and in Latakia and in Aleppo. And you can see that on social media and in my discussion with friends. About the atrocities that has happened, I think a good progress that we can discuss here, the killings of the Druze and Alawites that happened in March and July is not a policy of the government, okay? But again, going back to my first point, Sharia must control the rogue factions in the Syrian military and armed forces. These are mistakes. For the first time in Arab country, we saw the government sending to prosecution hundreds of its armed forces members for atrocities they committed. This is a good sign. A push should continue from the West, the US, the EU, and this is the only way that accountability is the only way that you can bring people together. I think this is the main failures in Iraq. There was no accountability toward the atrocities that happened for years. So,
is it fair to say if the minorities are frightened, investors will be frightened as well?
I think if minorities were threatened, the entirety of the country is threatened. One important note as well, not all minorities are threatened to be, and not, by the way, also there is this misconception, Kurds are in eastern area. No, Kurds are not in eastern area. Kurds are across the country. Actually, there are more Kurds in West Syria, and here I'm talking Hama, Homs, Damascus, Aleppo, than in East Syria. Same Christians are all over the country. There is no town, no city that doesn't have Christians in Syria. In my communication with them, when I was last year, when I was in Syria, I toured and I intentionally had discussion with everyone. The identity of the government is what pushes the fears into their heart, and the plan for the transitional period is a main concern. What comes next? Until now, we don't know what comes next.
So for the next round of questions, to make sure we have time for audience participation after, I'll just ask each of you to keep it to about 2 to 3 minutes. And Ambassador, returning to you, the tensions between Turkey and Israel have decreased in recent months. This was a question written before the Iran strikes, I think. But let's just say there's been tensions, and there's been speculation that the two U.S. allies could come into conflict. Do you see Turkey-Israel conflict as a real possibility? And how do you evaluate Israel's influence today in Syria?
Well, tensions between Turkey and Syria are there, and I think as long as Netanyahu government in Israel and Erdogan is president in Turkey, I think this tension will continue to remain. That doesn't mean that it's personal only. No, it has very important principal issues. But then the relations between the two are, very much guide the direction that they will go. The tensions remain, and Israel was very concerned to see Turkey on its doorstep at one point, because after Assad went, after his regime collapsed, Israel tried to make sure that the incoming Syrian regime, let's say, or whatever, Damascus did not pose a threat for Israel in the future, and it went on to get rid of all the military infrastructure and everything in Syria, bombing all those places. It occupied the unoccupied parts of the Golan Heights. It mingled in minority issues, especially the Druze and so on. So Israel is very much involved in Syria. Well, if Turkey wasn't in the equation, they would still be involved. It is something between Israel and Syria itself, but I think the presence of Turkey and its relations with the Sharia administration have created an additional element for Israel to get involved. Now, whether they will come to physically confront each other, everything is possible in today's world, but I think both sides know the cost of any such confrontation. It would be very costly for both sides, and I think they will refrain from this as much as possible. But I have to say, Israel is really playing a very negative role in Syria. I mean, they are acting without any due respect to the sovereignty of that country. It is as if the south of Syria is under occupation or a buffer zone. I mean, it's being treated as a buffer zone, and that is not really the way to build healthy relations with a neighboring country. Now, the agreement that they signed in Paris was very positive in the sense that it offered some constructive way forward, but then still Israel is trying to design a region which it sees compatible to its security needs. And I think until they come to this point, they will keep disturbing the efforts in Syria to build a new country. If I may say just a couple of things, 2 minutes, I think, very quickly. One on the energy issues. I mean, Syria is in very much need of financial resources to build the country. Actually, they have these resources. Before, I mean, part of it at least. Before the war, they had like 380,000 barrels a day of production. Now, all the oil fields are, well, a majority of them are under the control of the government of Damascus, but they still cannot use it. The infrastructure is in need of restoration and so on, but still every oil field in the country, in the northeast, is still in the hands of the SDF. And they still have not come to the point of reproduction. The second thing is minorities issues. I mean, we keep talking about Kurds, but there are also Alevites, there is also the Druze, there is also the Turkmen, there are the Christians. I mean, what is a minority? So, and then there is the majority. If you keep on, drawing a line in favor of one of the minorities, which would be resented by the majority Sunni Arabs, for example, that would also create a very negative environment for the future of countries. So I think talking about minorities, we should also take that point into consideration.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, Jonathan, in the medium to long term, how do you envision Syrian energy connecting to international markets? Maybe what's your best case scenario?
Best case scenario is that we deploy capital. One of the things that I forgot to mention was, Al-Shara is dealing too with the Chinese and the Russians. Don't forget that on September 28th of 23, Beijing invited Assad to Beijing with his wife, and there's a very close connection that was established throughout the years between Beijing and Syria. And Russia wasn't so happy either to lose their dominance, and they wanted control, and they still want control of the energy resources within the country, and they're fighting tooth and nail to keep a string or a hair in that fight. So if America doesn't stand up, Syria's options are going to be the Chinese, the Russians. If we don't fix the banking system first, we can't deploy capital, and we can't get insurance, we can't get coverage. There's a whole bunch of financial issues that need to be addressed, which Minister Yassir is really working on. Tom Barak is very engaged in. The president is very engaged in. The House, Tom Cotton, a number of people are trying to help move it forward in ways that will help Syria come in out of the dark. But we need to invest the money and the resources to fix the pipelines, to fix generation. Baker Hughes has been in country working on trying to fix and get an assessment of what is actually required to put the light switch on and what will it take to do it. So we need to be unleashed internally. And we have, again, playing whack-a-mole, because if they make a decision for the US, it impacts the decision for other countries that will be unhappy. And so we have to lift that pressure off of Al-Shara's shoulder and allow US companies to come in and start to do the work that they need to do to figure out how to lift it up as quickly as possible.
Excellent, thank you. So, Victoria, we've talked a little bit about the very personal involvement of President Trump and of Ambassador Barak in this, but is there a downside to that? Is it a risk over the long term that we've personalized our Syria policy? It's significant that Ambassador Barak, who's already dual-hatted as ambassador to Turkey and special envoy to Syria, is now taking on more and more of the Iraq portfolio as well. Is this opportunity, risk, or both?
Well, I mean, I think, you can see it both as an opportunity in that I think it has kind of contributed to this greater alignment of U.S. policy towards Syria with Turkey and, the potential to also create more alignment between the policies between Turkey and the United States on Iraq. I do think it's significant over the past several years. You really do see an improved relationship between Ankara and Baghdad, which, I think in seeing that, you see a lot of strategic alignment as well between how the United States and Turkey are seeing Iraq and Baghdad. So that's an opportunity. I think there is a risk in personalization. What you really want to see is relationships that are based on also some institutional frameworks and some institutional coordination. And so I think it's important that you follow up, this very personalized diplomacy with more institutional coordination. That's hard on the U.S. side, I think, right now. I think we've seen that policies being made by a very small, high-level group of people without necessarily a lot of coordination by the traditional bureaucracy. And while I think and sometimes that makes our policy more nimble on the United States, that you don't have the wheels of bureaucracy slowing things down. On the other hand, I think it makes it very difficult for other countries to really coordinate with the United States. And I think I've certainly seen that from the vantage point, both of having been recently at the State Department, but also now being at the Atlantic Council and knowing many countries' diplomats are wondering, who is it that we talk to find out what's going on? Tom Barak having, potentially 3 roles now is not atypical of this administration. There's a lot of really funny memes about Secretary of State Rubio having just a growing number of positions that he's filling as well. And, of course, Steve Witkoff filling multiple roles and doing multiple negotiations. There's really a limitation in the amount of bandwidth that each of these senior leaders has to devote to issues and problems which are extremely complicated.
Excellent, thank you. Anas, Ahmed al-Sharaa has been able to make significant progress gaining international support and legitimacy with the help of Tom Barak and Donald Trump, of course, maybe more than anybody expected. It's backing from the Gulf, has been extensive, Turkey, the United States, even a visit to Russia. Could you talk a little bit about Syria's approach to diplomacy and foreign powers, how it's balancing this, and who's running the show diplomatically?
I would say the foreign policy was the easiest portfolio for this government because it was a very low bar. The only thing that he had to do not to be an Assad. No bullying in their foreign policy. Don't work with non-state actors, despite he was a non-state actor. But still, as a state, don't fund non-state actors and work with your neighbors on security priorities. For the GCC states, I think he made their dream come true. Ended Iran influence in Syria, helped as well ending the arming of Hezbollah through Syria, the drugs. And for the first time since the 50s, I would say, maybe early 60s, Syria is not a spoiler or troublemaker for the GCC states. Probably President Eisenhower would also, because that was one of the things that his administration worked with the GCC states. So this is that was a very chronic problem for the GCC states. This is why we saw them very invested on an institutional level and personal level. For Jordan, for Turkey, for Jordan and Turkey in particular, these are 2 states directly involved or directly affected with the crisis in Syria, refugees, security, issues. They also showed all the support that is needed. And I think they need to step it up more with the capacity building for the Syrian bureaucrats. Because a successful transitional period and a stable Syria would definitely rely on a functioning state institutions. They have been involved, and I think we're seeing more and more involvement in training, particularly, and here we're not talking about funding, in training civil staff. This is one. For the US, I think this is where the universe was aligned in favor of President Shara. President Trump is someone who follows diplomacy through unconventional manners, and what was happening in Syria was unconventional. A jihadi who turned to be very pragmatic reached, the presidential palace in Damascus and decided to work with everyone to stabilize the country and ease their concerns. This is very unusual. There was the push by the leadership in Riyadh and Ankara to work with the new transitional government, and that was crucial as well. And I think only President Trump would make this bet and move towards lifting sanctions, appointing the ambassador in Turkey to be the special envoy, and the relationship between President Trump and Ambassador Barak also played a big role in making, pushing confidence and giving more credit to the Syrian government to do what was necessary to do. But the main failure in my opinion, the failure right now, or the shortcomings for the current foreign policy, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is no institutional plan for, I know I'm coming back a lot to institutions, but there is no planning for how to approach different files. And you asked me who's running the show. Until now, we have one person running the show, the minister. And in most of the cases, we have one person running the show. There hasn't been yet an inclusive approach to bring in more qualified Syrians, empower different individuals in all ministries, not only in the foreign ministry, to lift part of this burden. There is a huge burden. Foreign policy is involved in the transitional justice, in the human rights, whether SWEDA or SDF, both of them were, although it is an internal matter, but foreign relations were directly involved. Investments, wherever you look in Syria, foreign ties, relations is involved. And that's why they need to bring in more qualified and be more inclusive, qualified individuals.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we've got a few minutes now for questions. I see some people I respect very much in the room and people who know a lot about this problem set, so I expect to get some questions from you. I see a number of hands. We have a microphone that I think we can bring to the front. And my dear friend and respected colleague, who will be concise as is always his wont, Ambassador O'Neill, please.
Thank you very much. I am the Turkish ambassador here. I took the floor first and foremost to thank the distinguished panelists for their valuable insights. Thank you very much. It's been quite beneficial. Secondly, not only as Turkish ambassador here, but as someone who was involved with Syrian file for years back in Ankara, I would like to make a few remarks. In Syria, first and foremost, we should take a few steps back and to see what has happened. I think a Syria that is at peace itself and with its neighbors is a very important geostrategic asset. And we should always keep this vision in mind to make it a success. And in Shara government, we have an interlocutor. And in the absence of better alternatives, it would be good for everybody, all stakeholders in the region and internationally, to try to proactively engage with the government. You know, from the very beginning, this has been our approach as Turkey. We have seen some others have some hesitations as to whether or not to engage or to apply some conditionality in order to engage with the new government. We have always advocated that it can only through proactive engagement can we be able to influence trajectory of developments on the ground. So we welcomed Trump administration's energetic reaction and the way they lifted the sanctions immediately. They proactively engaged. Now, of course, with Ambassador Tom Barak, we are working quite closely. It does not mean that we have many challenges, as it was discussed here, but we need to keep, you know, this vision in mind. And secondly, as to our relationship and our cooperation with America on Syrian file, for many years, we were told about, you know, this 3 T's approach. That is an engagement in the north, you know, with SDF, that is temporary, tactical, transactional. I think this 3 T's approach has expired, and it's not applicable elsewhere, including Iran. We should be very careful about it. And now, I would like to suggest, you know, another approach, which we may call SUV. That is sovereignty, unity, and viability of the country. Meaning, we need to protect territorial integrity, help them in terms of maintaining, preserving their political unity, but also the viability of the state, which means control of over all borders, you know, oil resources and everything. Only this way, I think, we can help them to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think first hand we saw was in the back there. Please introduce yourself as well.
Sure, Alex Sanchez, I'm an analyst based here in DC. I have a question of refugees. Because of Israel's military operation in Lebanon, thousands of Syrians are fleeing from Lebanon back to Syria. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, the New York Times, and Al Jazeera, over 11,000 Syrians have left from Lebanon, crossed the Lebanese-Syrian border just in the past couple of days. I was wondering, how does this affect the Syrian government's state-building project if you're going to have now this influx of refugees that need shelter, basic food, water? Is the Syrian government incapable of providing this to their own citizens? Thank you so much.
Anas, I think this one may be best suited for you.
Yes, definitely. One of the first messages that we heard from the government, 2-3 months into right after the liberation, was that the return of refugees will be a major problem because it would put pressure on the already ailing infrastructure. I think more than half of the Syrian schools are destroyed entirely. Schools are in dire situation. We will only talk about healthcare and education. Most of the refugees left because they have their houses was destroyed. So that is the government approach. And whenever we bring the question of reconstruction, I don't think there is a clear vision. Until now, the government has not put forward a clear vision of reconstruction, particularly for areas that, towns. We have entire towns destroyed. And here we're talking about millions of homes either entirely destroyed or partially destroyed. That is the government approach so far. They are indirectly telling refugees, don't come back yet. until we have some sort of an investment in the reconstruction. I don't think this is a viable one. I think we've seen backlash in the last flood in north of Aleppo and Latakia, where refugees' tents were affected by the flood. So now there is a pressure. I hope the government would bring forward a better strategy on dealing with displaced population.
Thank you. I think we have the second question here, please.
Sertaç Korkmaz. I have a question regarding the ongoing military operations in Iran. If it turns to longer, how it will affect the future of Syria, especially relations between America and Turkey? Thank you.
Excellent question. We didn't talk about Iran too much here, but this is an opportunity to do something we talked about in the green room. So each of you briefly in turn, please. Ambassador, starting with you. Let's say the Iran war does not conclude in the next 2-3 weeks, but plays out over months. How do you see this impacting, Turkey's role in the region, stability in the region, and Syria?
Well, if the war went on, as you said, more than weeks, I think it would have very dramatic and drastic effects on the region as a whole, because if you look at the effects of the civil war in Syria, with a population of 22 million, the effects of the war in Iran with a population of 90 million and energy resources and everything, it would be dramatic, really, firstly. Secondly, I mean, nobody is going, well, I'm not going to shed any tears over the fall of the Mullah regime in Iran, but then if you look at the roadmap, there is no roadmap. I mean, what happens if the regime goes? Who replaces it? What is the alternative? I mean, I don't see any roadmap. If you look at the explanations by people in the U.S., I mean, the officials in the highest officials in the U.S. and elsewhere, I mean, everybody has another reason for having this attack on Iran. And that changes daily. So unfortunately, there is no organized plan of action as far as we can see from outside. I mean, as for Turkey, of course, Turkey is concerned of the repetition of what happened in Syria, again, a refugee crisis. And it's not only Iranians, by the way, but some few millions of Afghans in Iran. And then we have the terror issue. I mean, you always have a security vacuum, which is filled by organizations like PKK, like ISIS, and there is a lot of possibility of that coming from Iran. So it's very concerning, really. And the energy resources, the disruption of energy flow, and so on. I mean, if this crisis in Iran it lasts more than days or even weeks, it will be really very bad. I mean, we cannot really talk about what happens next, but then it would doom all the region, I think.
Jonathan, energy impacts, extended war?
I think it's a huge impact currently on LNG shipments. I think it's 20% of the world's LNG is coming out of the region, and they're blocked. Insurance, even with the president's offer to have DFC cover carriers' insurance premiums or risk, no one's moving their cargoes. So I see that being a huge issue. My biggest concern is what's going to happen when the money and the blood supply to the Houthis and Hezbollah stop. How is the reaction of those hungry proxies going to start to react and fester within the region, and what will be the aftermath there? I hope to see a movement of the Reza Shah coming in and create a stable situation and a transitional government, and bring in the street and let the people start to choose their own destiny for once in 47 years.
Victoria, what worries you most?
Well, look, I mentioned earlier, Iraq is basically a live fire zone right now. And so, we've had relatively few strikes that have occurred into Syria, but not none. The Iraqi militia groups have activated. You mentioned the proxies. Hezbollah has come in. The Iraqi militias have come in. The Iraqi militias are launching attacks into Kuwait, into Jordan. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that they start to launch more strikes into Syria to hit at the remaining U.S. troops that are there. These are all ways that Syria can be drawn in, via the Iraq channel. And I think what we could also see in Iraq right now, and we're starting to see some of this, the U.S. striking back against the militias. So, the potential for this escalatory spiral in Iraq to create a security situation that spills over into Syria, it's not zero. And as the U.S. takes strikes against militia leaders, against militia logistics hubs in Iraq, we're seeing them also strike right along the Syria-Iraq border. And so, as much as the Syrian leadership and Damascus may try to stay out of this, as we've seen, a number of countries throughout the region have been drawn in, by the actions of Iran.
I think we have time for one more. There was one on this side, yes. You get the last question. Yes. Make it good.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi, my name is Manar. I'm a graduate researcher at George Mason University. Thank you for this timely panel. My question is, when we talk about reconstruction beyond the economy, beyond infrastructure, Syria is facing a challenge of human capital. How is the current regime approaching this challenge, and what role do external actors have in supporting Syria and rebuilding its education system, its institutions? Thank you.
Okay. Why don't we do this in two parts? Anas, what are the needs and how are they being identified and prioritized in Syria? And then, Jonathan, if I can turn to you, you've talked about deployment of capital. Who's going to make the capital flow?
I think the education system was affected the most, with the health, of course. I haven't seen any plan from the government. I honestly haven't seen any plan from the government in most of the different sectors, except a little bit from the Ministry of Economy. They had put out some plan to address of the economic priorities. Not from the Health Ministry, not from Ministry of Education, and so on and so on. So about the human capital, I think, yes, you're right. There is a lack of a human capital in particular sectors. I think once the government gives sense of inclusivity, the Syrians will come back. One of the silver lining of refugee crisis that pushed Syrian outside Syria, that they accumulated a huge education, experience, professional experience and education from different parts of the world, from the neighboring countries, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Europe, and the US. So again, we need to see more encouragements from the government. Once also the investments go back to the country, and there is a more safe environment for investors, that would encourage, because also the financial compensation, salaries, and all of that plays a big role for qualified people to go back to the country.
So Jonathan, until Syrians get their act together in terms of the prioritization and saying, here's the types of help we need with human capital and financial capital, what can the West do?
So I met a university professor in the street of Damascus, and she said, what I need is a computer. I have a very tough time teaching with no internet and a computer. Human capital, I think that the Syrian people are extraordinarily smart. They've band-aided together their energy infrastructure, whether we like it or not. 50,000 barrels is still 50,000 barrels that they're producing on chewing gum that they're putting it together with. So I think the human capital is actually there. I think one of the things that the President Ashara said to me in our conversations was, I asked him, how do you turn a non-state actor into a state actor? He said, it's very simple. I said, what is it? He said, it's a 3-letter word. I said, what is it? He said, a job. And so he's fixated on bringing jobs into the region to take people and with a full belly, take them off a gun and put them at a dining room table with their families. So I think he's fixated on bringing opportunity, jobs, education in, fixing the university systems. It needs electricity to run a computer. To get an internet connection, you still need electricity, so he needs to stabilize the infrastructure first. He's trying his best. And I would say that deploying capital will come when safety and security comes. And I think with the support that President Trump and Tom Barrack have given, and the movement towards bringing them into the financial network, opening an account, I think, very shortly in New York is going to help stabilize that and give it the beginning of a foundational brick. I think we'll start to see capital deploy. But the diaspora is there. There's two diasporas that I've seen that have such a love for their nation that they want to go back. One is the Moroccans, and two is the Syrians. They have this aspiration of returning to their homeland. And if each Syrian diaspora, people in the diaspora who've built wealth, come and deploy $100,000 of capital internally, you have a great amount of deployment of capital coming into the nation. So you've got to bring both in. The diaspora has to activate as well.
Excellent. We're very close to time, but I'd like to give just one or two comments, time for one or two comments both to Ambassador Onhan and to Victoria. So concisely, please.
Thank you. On this human capital thing, the civil war in Syria has really given a very wrong impression of the Syrian people as people either killing each other or fleeing somewhere. But the Syrians, as you said, are cultured, educated, very industrious, and so on. And I think the biggest asset of Syria are the Syrian people themselves. But we need them in Syria. I mean, they are all over in Turkey, elsewhere, and so on, but they are needed in Syria. I know the difficulties, of course, when you don't have security, when you don't have stability, when you don't have health services sufficient, when you don't have sufficient education. You want to wait and wait for things to improve. But no, I think that is really the time for Syrians to go back to their country and help build this country.
Victoria, final thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think the top line for me here is, we're moving from a period where Syria was actually a major bilateral irritant in the relationship between the United States and Turkey to an era where actually there is great strategic alignment and an opportunity for both countries to work together to really advance stability, security, prosperity in Syria. And so, I think that's something that can happen, of course, at a government-to-government level, but I think there's natural opportunities for private sectors to also work together in pursuit of that goal.
Excellent. Well, I finished this session exactly half full. All right, the things are good, but we have to remember the long suffering of Syria. 15 years, much longer if you trace it back to the entirety of the Ba'athist dictatorship, but really 15 years of extremely sharp suffering that bothered my conscience as a military and then a civilian at the Department of State overseeing this file. Things are so much better than that now, and yet lack of institutionalization in the country, lack of the fundamental economic ties that need to grow and develop, and frankly, the sort of fragile nature of the consensus in the U.S. to continue on a pretty constructive course are all reasons for concern. So we'll see where that goes. I'd like to really thank this wonderful panel. I've learned a ton from listening to you. Please, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And thank you all that are watching and here in the room. This concludes the panel.